Shunned by all, saved by one, a human's bond with a disabled alien. The mining station. Kepler 442b floated in the darkness between two dying stars, its metal hull scarred by countless meteor impacts and solar storms. Inside the cramped corridors, dozens of alien species worked together in an uneasy alliance, all united by one common goal: survival in the harshest region of known space. Marcus Chen wiped sweat from his forehead as he guided another load of precious trilithium ore through the processing bay. As the only human on the station, he had grown accustomed to the suspicious glances and whispered conversations that followed him wherever he went. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. Most aliens considered them primitive warmongers, barely civilized enough to be trusted with basic mining equipment. The Zorathi supervisor, a tall creature with blue-scaled skin and 4 arms, clicked its mandibles in disapproval as Marcus passed by. "Careful with that ore, human. Your species has a reputation for breaking things they don't understand." Marcus bit back a sharp response. He needed this job, and arguing with supervisors was a quick way to find himself floating in vacuum. Instead, he nodded respectfully and continued his work, loading the heavy containers onto the transport system with practiced efficiency. Near the outer ring of the station, in a section marked as condemned and off-limits, something stirred in the shadows. The area had been damaged in a reactor leak months ago, deemed too dangerous for habitation by station safety protocols. But safety protocols meant little to someone who had nowhere else to go. Zixith dragged herself across the cold metal floor, her lower body completely paralyzed from an injury sustained during the same reactor accident that had contaminated this section. She was a Kethalarian, a species known for their incredible telepathic abilities and their rigid social structure that demanded physical perfection from all members. Her once beautiful crystalline exoskeleton was now cracked and dull, her telepathic organs damaged beyond repair. When the accident happened, her own people had been quick to abandon her. In Kethalarian society, the disabled were considered burdens, reminders of weakness that brought shame to entire family lines. The station medical bay had done what they could for her physical injuries. But when it became clear that her paralysis was permanent, even the other alien species had turned away. Who would waste resources on a broken telepath? Hunger gnawed at her constantly now. The automated food dispensers in her section had stopped working weeks ago, and she was too proud to beg from the other inhabitants who already saw her as worthless. She spent her days listening to the vibrations in the walls, trying to predict when the next supply ship might arrive, when someone might drop something edible that she could scavenge. Marcus finished his shift and walked through the residential sectors, nodding politely to the various aliens who either ignored him or glared with open hostility. The Thrakari thought humans smelled terrible, the Vorthon considered them too aggressive, and the Zilfin believed they were mentally deficient compared to most sapient species. At least his small quarters provided some peace from the constant judgment. As he passed through a maintenance corridor taking a shortcut to his room, he heard something unusual. A faint scratching sound like metal dragging against metal. The sound was coming from the condemned section, which should have been completely empty. Against his better judgment, Marcus followed the sound. The radiation levels here were still elevated, but not immediately dangerous for short exposure. He activated his portable scanner and moved carefully through the debris-strewn corridors. That's when he saw her. Zixith froze when she noticed the human approaching. She had heard about humans, of course. Everyone on the station spoke of them in hushed, disapproving tones. They were supposed to be violent and unpredictable, barely evolved from their savage origins. She expected him to either attack her or report her presence to station security, who would likely eject her into space. Instead, Marcus knelt down slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Hey there, are you hurt?" Zixith stared at him with her large, multifaceted eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a harsh whisper. "Go away, human. Nothing here concerns you." Marcus noticed the way she held herself, the obvious signs of malnutrition and exhaustion. Her crystalline skin, which should have been bright and iridescent, was dull and cracked. "You're injured and hungry. When's the last time you ate?" "That is not your concern." Zixth tried to pull herself away from him, but her weakened state made movement difficult. "Maybe not. But I'm making it my concern." Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out his daily ration pack. "Here, you need this more than I do." Zixith stared at the offered food in confusion. "Why? Your species is known for its selfishness. What do you want in return?" Marcus sat down on a piece of fallen debris, making himself less threatening. "Nothing. You're hungry, I have food. It's that simple." "Nothing is that simple." Despite her words, Zixth's eyes never left the ration pack. The smell of real food was almost overwhelming after weeks of near starvation. "Look, I don't know your story, but I can see you're in trouble. Everyone on this station treats me like garbage because I'm human. I'm guessing they're not treating you much better for whatever reason." Marcus placed the ration pack on the ground between them and slid it closer to her. Sometimes people in similar situations should help each other out. Zixith hesitated for a long moment, then grabbed the pack and tore it open with desperate hands. The nutrition bars inside were bland and processed, but they tasted like heaven to her starved senses. She forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything at once. "Thank you," she whispered finally. Marcus nodded. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" "Zixith." She studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception or mockery. "You said others treat you poorly because you are human, but humans are not disabled." "Why do they shun you?" "Because they think we're violent primitives who can't be trusted. Apparently, our history of warfare makes us unsuitable for civilized society." Marcus shrugged. "What about you? What happened here?" Zixith's expression darkened. "I was injured in the reactor leak. My telepathic abilities were damaged, and my lower body paralyzed. In Kethalarian society, the disabled are considered undesirable. My own family disowned me. The other species on the station see me as a burden not worth their time." Marcus felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "That's horrible. You're still a person, disability or not." "Person?" Zixth tilted her head. "Your translation seems incorrect. I am a being, not a person. Where I come from, being a person isn't about what species you are or whether your body works perfectly. It's about having thoughts, feelings, hopes, making choices. You qualify." Marcus stood up. "I should probably get going before someone notices I'm here, but I'll come back tomorrow, same time." "You do not need to." Zixith started to protest. "I know I don't need to. I want to." Marcus paused at the entrance to the condemned section. "Everyone deserves to have at least one person who gives a damn about them, even if it's just a violent primitive human." As Marcus disappeared back into the main corridors, Zixith stared after him in bewilderment. In all her years of life, no one had ever shown her such simple kindness without expecting something in return. Her own people valued strength and perfection above all else. The other species on the station were too concerned with their own survival to spare thought for someone they saw as a lost cause. But this human, this supposedly savage and selfish creature, had shared his food and promised to return. Not because he had to, not because he would gain anything from it, but simply because he thought it was the right thing to do. For the first time in months, Zixith felt something other than despair. It was a small spark, barely there, but it was hope, and for now, that was enough. The next day, Marcus kept his promise. He brought more food, a thermal blanket he had purchased with his limited credits, and most importantly, conversation. They talked about their respective home worlds, their families, their dreams before circumstances had stranded them on this remote mining station. Zixith learned that Marcus had come to space not for adventure or profit, but to escape the grinding poverty of Earth's overcrowded cities. His parents had died in a factory accident when he was young, leaving him to fend for himself on the streets. The promise of steady work and a chance to see the stars had been irresistible, even if it meant enduring constant discrimination from alien co-workers. Marcus learned that Zixith had once been a promising young telepath, destined for a prestigious position in the Cathalarian diplomatic corps. She had volunteered for the mining station assignment as a way to gain experience with other species before beginning her real career. The reactor accident had destroyed not just her body, but her entire future. "Do you ever think about going home?" Marcus asked during one of their conversations. Zixith's crystalline features flickered with pain. "There is no home for me anymore. In Cathalarian society, I am already considered dead. My name has been struck from family records. If I returned, I would be turned away at the spaceport." "That's insane. Your own family would really do that?" "They have no choice. Our culture demands it. The disabled are seen as genetic failures, proof that our bloodlines are becoming corrupted. To acknowledge me would bring shame to my entire lineage for generations." Zixith's voice was matter-of-fact, but Marcus could see the hurt in her eyes. "Well, their loss," Marcus said firmly. "You're one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. If they can't see that, they're the ones who are defective, not you." These conversations became the highlight of both their days. In a station full of beings who saw them as failures or outcasts, they had found something precious: acceptance. But their secret meetings couldn't stay hidden forever. 3 weeks after their first encounter, a maintenance team discovered evidence of someone living in the condemned section. Security began conducting sweeps, looking for the unauthorized inhabitant. Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before they found Zixith, and when they did, she would likely be ejected from the station entirely. "We need to get you out of here," Marcus told her urgently during what might be their last meeting. "They're getting closer to finding you." "And go where?" Zixith asked bitterly. "I have no money, no legal status on any world, and no way to support myself. At least here I have shelter." "I've been thinking about that. There's an independent trade ship that stops here every few weeks. The captain is a freebooter, doesn't ask too many questions about passengers as long as they can pay their way. I've saved up enough credits to buy you passage to the neutral zone." Zixith stared at him in shock. "You would spend your savings on me? That money was meant to secure your own future." "What future? I'm stuck on this station for at least another 2 years on my contract. By then, I'll have saved up again." Marcus reached into his pack and pulled out a credit chip. "The neutral zone has planets where disabled beings can find work and acceptance. It's not perfect, but it's better than here." "I cannot accept this," Zixith protested, even as her hands trembled with the desire to take the chip. "You owe me nothing." "You're right. I don't owe you anything. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because you're my friend, and friends help each other." Marcus pressed the credit chip into her hands. "Besides, you'd do the same for me if our positions were reversed." Zixith looked down at the chip, then back at Marcus's earnest face. In her culture, such generosity between non-family members was almost unheard of. Yet this human, supposedly primitive and selfish, was willing to sacrifice his own security for her welfare. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because everyone deserves a chance. Because being different doesn't make you less valuable. Because you've become important to me, and I can't stand the thought of you suffering when I might be able to help." Tears began to form in Zixth's compound eyes, something that rarely happened for her species. In all my years, no one has ever... She struggled to find words. My own people cast me aside like refuse, yet you, a stranger from a species I was taught to despise, show me more kindness than I have ever known. Maybe that says more about what your people taught you than it does about humans, Marcus suggested gently. Before Zixith could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Security was making another sweep, and they were heading directly for their section. Go, Zixith urged. If they find you here with me, you will lose your job. Marcus hesitated, torn between self-preservation and loyalty to his friend. The trade ship leaves tomorrow morning. Docking Bay 7. Promise me you'll be on it. I promise. Marcus squeezed her hand briefly, then slipped away through a maintenance shaft, leaving Zixith alone with the credit chip and a decision that would change the course of both their lives. As the security team's lights grew brighter in the distance, Zixith made her choice. She would honor the gift Marcus had given her, not just the money, but the belief that her life still had value. She would find a way to survive, to build something new from the ruins of her old existence. And someday, somehow, she would find a way to repay the debt she owed to the one being in the galaxy who had seen her worth when everyone else saw only damaged goods, the human who had saved her when her own people had abandoned her to die. Shunned by all, saved by one, a human's bond with a disabled alien. Second part. 5 years had passed since Zixith left the mining station, and the galaxy had become a very different place. The independent trade ship had taken her to New Haven, a planet in the neutral zone where outcasts from dozens of species had built a thriving community based on acceptance rather than conformity. Using the credits Marcus had given her, Zixith had purchased basic cybernetic leg braces that allowed her limited mobility. More importantly, she had discovered that her damaged telepathic organs, while unable to read minds as they once could, had developed a unique ability to interface directly with computer systems. This rare skill made her invaluable in an age where technology and biological minds rarely mixed effectively. She now ran a small but successful consulting business, helping various species adapt their technology for better cross-cultural compatibility. Her reputation had grown steadily, and she had even been contracted by the Galactic Trade Consortium on several occasions. The scared, abandoned creature who had hidden in condemned corridors was gone, replaced by a confident professional who had found her place in the universe. But she never forgot the human who had made it all possible. Marcus, meanwhile, had completed his contract on the mining station and found work on a cargo hauler running supplies between the core worlds and the outer colonies. It was dangerous work, but it paid well and gave him the freedom to travel. He often wondered what had happened to Zixith, hoping she had found the better life he had helped her seek. Neither of them expected their paths to cross again, but the galaxy has a way of surprising people. The trouble began when a new species called the hegemony emerged from the galactic core, claiming vast territories and demanding tribute from any worlds that wanted to continue existing. Unlike previous conquerors who sought resources or strategic advantage, the hegemony seemed driven by an ideology of genetic purity and species hierarchy. Their message was simple: superior species deserved to rule, inferior species deserve to serve, and flawed species deserve to be eliminated entirely. The hegemony's forces were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Their soldiers were genetically enhanced warriors bred for combat. Their ships were equipped with weapons that could sterilize entire planets. And their leaders were cold, calculating beings who saw compassion as a weakness to be exploited. World after world fell to their advance. The great powers of the galaxy, too busy squabbling among themselves, failed to mount an effective resistance. Species that had spent centuries building careful diplomatic relationships suddenly found themselves divided by the hegemony's rhetoric about genetic superiority and racial purity. Marcus first encountered the hegemony when his cargo ship, the free trader Cassandra, was stopped at a checkpoint near the Vega system. Hegemony warships had blockaded the trade routes, demanding to inspect all vessels for genetic defectives and inferior cargo. Captain Sarah Wells, the ship's commander and one of the few humans Marcus had met who treated him as an equal, stood defiantly on the bridge as hegemony soldiers boarded their vessel. "This is a civilian cargo hauler operating under Treaty 7 protocols," she declared. "You have no authority to detain us." The hegemony officer, a tall humanoid creature with pale skin and cold silver eyes, barely glanced at her. "Treaty 7 is null and void. The old order has ended. Submit to inspection or be destroyed." The search was thorough and humiliating. The hegemony soldiers confiscated medical supplies bound for a colony world, claiming they could be used to artificially extend the lives of inferior beings. They also attempted to seize 3 alien passengers who were traveling to reunite with their families. "These beings show clear signs of genetic deficiency," the officer explained when Captain Wells protested. "The tall one has a speech impediment, the blue one is missing a digit, and the third one appears to have a learning disability. They will be relocated to appropriate facilities." "They're passengers, not prisoners," Marcus said, stepping forward. "They've done nothing wrong." The officer turned his cold gaze on Marcus. "Ah, a human. Your species is under review for classification. Some of our scientists believe you have potential while others consider you too chaotic for integration. Your attitude here will be noted in your species file." The threat was clear. Marcus bit back his anger and watched helplessly as the 3 innocent beings were dragged away. Their crime had been existing with imperfections in a galaxy that was rapidly deciding such things were unacceptable. News from the front lines grew worse each day. The hegemony wasn't just conquering territory. They were systematically identifying and removing anyone they deemed genetically or culturally inferior. Disabled beings were among the first to disappear, along with those from species considered primitive or corrupted. Reports began filtering in about purity camps, where millions of beings were being held in horrible conditions. Some spoke of medical experiments designed to correct genetic flaws. Others whispered about mass exterminations disguised as mercy killings. Marcus thought constantly of Zixith. Had the hegemony reached New Haven? Was she safe? Had she been classified as one of the defectives marked for elimination? On New Haven, Zixith was facing the same fears, but from a different perspective. The planet had become a refuge for those fleeing hegemony persecution, and every day brought new horror stories from evacuees. The hegemony's definition of genetic deficiency was broad and arbitrary, encompassing everything from physical disabilities to cultural differences to simple nonconformity. Worse, some species that had once welcomed diversity were now turning on their own disabled populations, hoping to appease the hegemony and avoid conquest. The Cathalarians had actually volunteered to cleanse their own worlds, eager to prove their genetic superiority to their new overlords. "They're not just conquering," Zixith told the New Haven Council during an emergency session. "They're converting entire species to their ideology, making them believe that compassion is weakness and diversity is corruption." Council leader Vash, an elderly Thuranian with one cybernetic arm, nodded grimly. "We've been monitoring their communications. They see disabled beings not just as inferior, but as evidence that the galaxy has become corrupted by soft thinking. They believe that eliminating us will somehow purify the gene pool of all species." "What are our options?" asked Dr. Yenlin, a farseer whose blindness had never prevented her from becoming one of the galaxy's most renowned quantum physicists. "Limited," Vash admitted. "We're too far from any major military power to expect rescue. Our defenses are minimal, and frankly, most of the galaxy either supports the hegemony's goals or is too afraid to oppose them. "Then we fight," said Zixith firmly. "Not with weapons we don't have, but with what we do have: knowledge, determination, and the ability to think differently than our enemies expect." "What do you mean?" Dr. Yenlin asked. Zixth activated a holographic display showing shipping routes throughout the galaxy. "The hegemony's strength comes from their belief in their own superiority. They see us as defective and weak, so they don't consider us a real threat. That gives us advantages they don't expect." "Such as?" "They rely heavily on standard communication protocols and computer systems designed for normal biological minds. But those of us with altered neural patterns, damaged telepathic organs, or cybernetic interfaces can sometimes access systems in ways they never anticipated." Zixith highlighted several key strategic points on the map. "If we could disrupt their communications at critical moments, we might be able to coordinate with resistance movements on other worlds." Council Leader Vash leaned forward with interest. "You're talking about cyber warfare. Extremely dangerous and probably hopeless against their advanced systems." "Not hopeless. Different." Zixith's crystalline features shifted as she accessed her interface abilities. "My damaged telepathic organs can interface with computer systems in ways that normal Kethalarian telepathy cannot. I've learned to see patterns in data streams that others miss. It's not telepathy anymore. It's something new." "Even if you could hack their systems," Dr. Yenlin pointed out. "What then? We're still talking about a few thousand refugees against an interstellar empire." "We're not trying to defeat them militarily," Zixth explained. "We're trying to remind the galaxy that there's another way to live, that strength comes from unity, not purity, that our differences make us stronger, not weaker." "A propaganda campaign?" Vash sounded skeptical. "A demonstration. We show them what beings like us can accomplish when we work together. We prove that their ideology is not just wrong, but counterproductive." Zixith turned to address the full council. "The hegemony wants to eliminate anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of perfection. But diversity has always been the galaxy's greatest strength. We need to remind everyone of that fact." Over the following weeks, Zixth worked tirelessly to develop her plan. Using her unique abilities, she began infiltrating hegemony communication networks, not to cause damage, but to gather intelligence and plant carefully crafted messages. The messages didn't criticize the hegemony directly. Instead, they shared stories. Stories of scientific breakthroughs made by beings the hegemony considered defective. Medical advances discovered by researchers with learning disabilities. Engineering marvels created by teams that included members from inferior species. Most importantly, the messages included a story about a human and a disabled alien who had found strength in friendship across species lines. Meanwhile, Marcus and the crew of the free trader Cassandra were doing their part for the resistance in a different way. They had begun smuggling refugees from hegemony-controlled space, hiding them in modified cargo containers, and falsifying manifests to avoid detection. It was dangerous work made more perilous by the fact that anyone caught helping genetic defectives was themselves marked for elimination. But Captain Wells had made her position clear. The day we stop helping people in need is the day we stop being human. During one rescue mission, they received an encrypted message that made Marcus's heart race. It was from Zixith, transmitted through a network of resistance contacts, and it contained coordinates for a secret meeting. "I know this is incredibly dangerous," her message read, "but I have a plan that could turn the tide of this war. I need someone I trust, someone who understands what we're fighting for. I need my friend." Without hesitation, Marcus convinced Captain Wells to alter their course for New Haven. If Zixith needed him, he would be there, just as she had been there for him during those dark days on the mining station when her friendship had been the only bright spot in his life. The reunion took place in a hidden facility beneath New Haven's surface. When Marcus saw Zixith again, he barely recognized her. The broken, desperate being he had found in the condemned corridors was gone, replaced by someone who radiated confidence and determination. "Marcus!" Zixith's joy was evident as she embraced him carefully with her enhanced arms. "I was not certain you would come." "Are you kidding? After everything you've done for yourself, everything you've accomplished? I wouldn't miss this for anything." Marcus looked around the sophisticated command center where dozens of beings from various species worked at computer terminals and communication arrays. "This is incredible! You built all this?" "We built it," Zixth corrected. "Every being here was once considered defective by someone else's standards. But together, we've created something the hegemony never expected. A network of the unwanted that spans half the galaxy." Marcus felt a surge of pride for his friend's transformation, but also concern for the magnitude of what she was attempting. "What exactly is your plan? And please tell me it doesn't involve you sacrificing yourself heroically." Zixith's crystalline features shifted in what he had learned was her equivalent of a smile. "Nothing so dramatic. We are going to do something the hegemony considers impossible. We are going to prove that cooperation is stronger than conquest." "How?" "By coordinating the largest simultaneous humanitarian operation in galactic history. Food for the hungry, medical supplies for the injured, rescue operations for the trapped, and most importantly, a message of hope for everyone who has forgotten that compassion is not weakness." Marcus stared at the massive display showing shipping routes, communication networks, and resistance cells throughout known space. The logistics alone would be staggering. "Indeed, which is why we need every advantage we can get, including," Zixth turned to face him directly, "the help of someone who taught me that true strength comes not from being perfect, but from choosing to help others despite our own flaws." As Marcus looked at the scope of what Zixith was planning, he realized this was more than just a resistance operation. This was an attempt to remind an entire galaxy of its better nature, to show that the bonds between different beings could be stronger than any weapon. It was also incredibly dangerous. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean their own deaths. It would mean the final triumph of an ideology that saw compassion as corruption and difference as disease. But as Marcus looked around the room at all the beings the hegemony had written off as worthless, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Zixth's smile widened. "Help me save a galaxy that never wanted either of us in the first place." Shunned by all, saved by one, a human's bond with a disabled alien. Final part. The plan they called Convergence was ambitious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. Across hundreds of worlds, thousands of beings that the hegemony had labeled as defective would simultaneously execute coordinated humanitarian missions while broadcasting a unified message about the value of diversity and cooperation. Marcus found himself at the center of the most crucial element: a massive supply run that would deliver food and medical aid to refugee camps on 12 different worlds, all while evading hegemony patrols and their sympathizers. "The timing has to be perfect," Zixth explained during their final planning session. "Each supply delivery must arrive at exactly the right moment to coincide with our communication broadcast. If even one element fails, the whole operation loses its impact." Marcus studied the complex logistics display, noting the narrow windows they would have to navigate between patrol routes. "This is insane. Half these systems are under heavy hegemony surveillance." "Which is precisely why it will work," Dr. Yenlin interjected, her sightless eyes somehow seeming to focus on something the rest of them couldn't see. "They expect us to hide, to cower, to accept their judgment that we are worthless. They do not expect us to act with the same boldness they claim as their own." Captain Wells, who had volunteered her ship for the most dangerous leg of the supply run, nodded agreement. The hegemony's greatest weakness is their arrogance. They're so convinced of their own superiority that they can't imagine inferior beings outsmarting them. Over the following days, the network of outcasts and refugees worked with desperate efficiency. Supply caches were assembled and hidden throughout contested space. Communication relay stations were positioned to ensure the broadcast would reach every inhabited system simultaneously. Most importantly, the message itself was crafted with care. Instead of a traditional military transmission or political manifesto, they chose to tell stories. Real stories about real beings who had overcome prejudice and disability to accomplish extraordinary things. Stories about cooperation between different species. Stories about the strength that came from embracing difference rather than fearing it. The centerpiece was the story of a human and a Cathalarian whose friendship had sparked a movement that now spanned the galaxy. "Are you certain about including our personal story?" Marcus asked Zixith as they reviewed the final broadcast. "It makes us targets." "We were already targets the moment we chose to be different from what others expected," Zixith replied. "Besides, our story is what this entire operation is built on. The idea that connection across difference is possible, that helping someone you barely know is not weakness, but strength. The hegemony will come for us specifically once they realize we're the architects of this. Then we had better make sure our message reaches everyone before they arrive." The day of convergence dawned clear and cold on New Haven. Across the galaxy, thousands of beings prepared to risk everything to prove that the hegemony's vision of a purified galaxy was not only wrong, but destructive. Marcus piloted a modified cargo hauler loaded with medical supplies toward the Rigel system, where 3 million refugees from a dozen species waited in overcrowded camps. His ship was one of 50 vessels making similar runs to different systems, each carrying both physical aid and recording equipment to document their missions. The first challenge came at the hegemony checkpoint near Rigel. The inspection officers were particularly thorough, suspicious of any unusual traffic in the area. "Purpose of visit?" the hegemony officer demanded as his troops swarmed over Marcus's ship. "Medical supply delivery to approved refugee facilities," Marcus responded, handing over carefully forged documentation. "Standard humanitarian shipment under Emergency Protocol 12. The officer studied the papers with cold efficiency. "These refugees are scheduled for relocation to appropriate facilities next week. Medical supplies will not be necessary." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Relocation was hegemony code for transportation to the purity camps, from which no one ever returned. "The delivery was authorized weeks ago. Surely it's better to keep them healthy until the relocation is complete. Your concern for genetic defectives is noted in your file, human." The officer's silver eyes seemed to look right through Marcus. "You may proceed, but understand that continued involvement with these beings will affect your species classification review." As Marcus's ship continued toward the refugee camps, he activated his communication system to warn the other supply crews about increased hegemony attention. The response was immediate and unanimous. The operation would proceed as planned. On New Haven, Zixith monitored the progress of all 50 supply missions while simultaneously preparing to execute the most dangerous part of convergence, a direct hack into the hegemony's primary communication network to ensure their message reached every inhabited world simultaneously. "Hegemony security protocols are more sophisticated than anticipated," reported Kess, a young Thuranian whose cybernetic neural implants allowed her to process data at superhuman speeds. "Their firewalls are adapting to our intrusion attempts in real time." "Then we adapt faster," Zixith replied, interfacing directly with the computer system through her damaged telepathic organs. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced during her days as a normal telepath. Instead of reading minds, she was reading the thoughts of machines. Understanding their logic patterns and finding ways to work within them rather than against them. "I'm detecting a vulnerability," she announced after several tense minutes. "Their system assumes all intrusion attempts will follow standard hacking protocols used by militarily trained personnel. But our neural patterns are different enough that we can access subsystems through pathways they never expected." Dr. Yenlin leaned forward with interest. "You're using your disability as an advantage?" "Exactly. What they see as broken, we're using as evolved." Zixth's interface with the computer system deepened, and she began to see the vast network of the hegemony's communication infrastructure laid out before her like a three-dimensional map. Beginning message insertion now. At precisely the same moment, across hundreds of worlds, the supply ships reached their destinations. Marcus landed at the largest refugee camp in the Rigel system just as thousands of hungry beings emerged from their shelters to receive the unexpected aid. "Who sent this?" asked the camp administrator, a Vorthon whose own leg braces marked him as someone who would likely be targeted for elimination once the hegemony's relocation began. "Friends," Marcus replied simply. "People who believe you deserve better than this." Similar scenes played out throughout the galaxy as supply ships distributed food, medicine, and hope to beings who had been written off by the New Order. Every delivery was recorded, every face of gratitude captured, every moment of relief documented. And then, exactly as planned, every communication system in known space simultaneously broadcast the same message. The transmission began not with speeches or slogans, but with images. A human sharing food with a disabled alien in the darkness of a forgotten corridor. The same alien, years later, leading a network of refugees in building a better world. Supply ships landing on dozens of planets, bringing aid to those who needed it most. "My name is Zixth." Her voice reached every inhabited world in the galaxy. 5 years ago, I was dying alone in a condemned section of a mining station, abandoned by my own people because I was damaged, imperfect, broken. I was saved by someone who had every reason to ignore my suffering, someone from a species I had been taught to despise. The images shifted to show Marcus and the other supply crews distributing aid to refugee camps, their faces determined and compassionate, despite the danger they faced. "His name is Marcus Chen, and he is human. According to the hegemony, his species is under review for classification as inferior. According to my people, his species is primitive and violent. According to him, none of that matters when someone needs help." More images followed. Disabled beings working together on New Haven, creating technology and art and solutions that benefited everyone. Former enemies from different species cooperating to solve problems no one could handle alone. Children from a dozen different worlds playing together despite their differences. The hegemony promises you a galaxy purified of weakness, where only the strong and perfect deserve to exist. But they are wrong about what strength means. They are wrong about what perfection looks like. And they are wrong about what the galaxy can become when we choose cooperation over conquest. On hegemony command ships throughout space, officers watched in growing alarm as the broadcast continued, despite their attempts to block it. The signal was coming from everywhere and nowhere, routed through communication networks they thought they controlled completely. They want you to believe that compassion is weakness, that difference is disease, that helping others makes you inferior, Zixth's voice continued. But today, thousands of beings they labeled as defective have proven them wrong. We have fed the hungry, healed the sick, and offered hope to the hopeless. Not because we expect reward or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The final segment of the broadcast showed the scope of convergence itself. 50 supply missions executing simultaneously, refugee camps receiving aid, disabled beings working together to coordinate the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. This is what the galaxy looks like when we choose to see strength in our differences rather than shame. This is what we can accomplish when we work together instead of tearing each other down. This is why the hegemony fears us, not because we are weak, but because we prove that their vision of purity is a lie. As the broadcast concluded, reactions began flooding in from across the galaxy. On some worlds, hegemony supporters dismissed the message as propaganda from genetic defectives. But on many others, beings who had been silently enduring oppression began to speak up. The Thuranian Assembly formally condemned the hegemony's racial policies. 3 core worlds announced they would no longer cooperate with deportation orders. Most significantly, several species that had been collaborating with the hegemony began to question whether genetic purity was worth the price they were paying. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Fleets were dispatched to crush the rebellion before it could spread further. New Haven was marked for immediate sterilization, and arrest orders were issued for Marcus, Zixith, and the other leaders of Convergence. But something unexpected happened. As hegemony forces moved to attack the supply ships still distributing aid, they encountered resistance not just from the crews themselves, but from the beings they were trying to protect. On Rigel, refugee camp inhabitants surrounded Marcus's ship as hegemony troops approached, forming a human shield of the very people the soldiers claimed to be saving from genetic contamination. "You want to take our supplies?" shouted the camp administrator, his leg braces glinting in the alien sunlight. "You'll have to go through us first." Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. Beings who had been cowed into submission suddenly found their voices, inspired by the example of those who had risked everything to help them. The hegemony had expected to face a small group of defective rebels. Instead, they found themselves confronting the moral awakening of entire populations. On New Haven, Zixith and her team prepared for the inevitable assault. They had accomplished what they set out to do, proving that cooperation was stronger than conquest, that diversity was strength rather than weakness, that the bonds between different beings could withstand any attempt to break them. "Do you regret anything?" Marcus asked as they waited for the hegemony fleet to arrive. Zixith considered the question carefully. "I regret that it took a galactic crisis for us to realize what we were capable of together. I regret that billions of beings had to suffer before we found the courage to act. But I do not regret the choice we made. Even if it costs us our lives? Especially then, because our lives only have meaning if we use them to make things better for others. You taught me that in those corridors all those years ago." The hegemony fleet arrived 3 hours later. But they found New Haven's skies filled with ships from a dozen different species, volunteers who had come to stand with the refugees, and outcasts they now recognized as heroes. The battle that followed was brief but decisive, not because the defenders had superior weapons or tactics, but because the hegemony discovered that an empire built on hatred and division could not stand against an alliance founded on compassion and mutual respect. In the aftermath, as rescue ships tended to the wounded and rebuilding efforts began, Marcus and Zixth stood together in the ruins of the command center they had used to coordinate Convergence. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we build something better," Zixith replied. "A galaxy where being different is celebrated rather than feared, where helping others is seen as strength rather than weakness, where no one has to hide in abandoned corridors waiting to die." "Think we can really do it?" Zixith looked around at the diverse collection of beings working together to heal the wounded and rebuild what had been destroyed. Humans worked alongside Kethalarians. Disabled beings coordinated with enhanced soldiers. Former enemies had become allies united by a common vision of what the galaxy could become. "We already have," she said. "The hegemony's greatest mistake was believing that they could define worth based on perfection. But true worth comes from our willingness to help others, to stand together despite our differences, to choose compassion even when it costs us everything." Marcus nodded. Remembering a scared alien in a dark corridor, and the choice he had made to share his food with a stranger. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest consequences. And sometimes, Zixth added, being shunned by everyone else is exactly what we need to find the one person who really matters. As they walked together through the crowds of beings rebuilding their world, neither of them looked back at the destruction behind them. Instead, they looked forward to a future they had helped create, a galaxy where being different was not a curse to be hidden, but a gift to be shared. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And at its heart was a simple truth that a human and an alien had discovered in the darkness of a forgotten corridor. Everyone deserves to have at least one person who gives a damn about them. In the end, that was enough to change everything.